When you look at an X-ray of a broken arm, there's a certain comfort in the precision of it.
Yeah.
See the jagged white line, the doctor points right to it, and the diagnosis is totally binary. Like it's broken or it's not.
Right. Yeah, it's safe. We constantly seek out that binary simplicity because categorizing the world is just comfortable.
Exactly. But when you step out of the hospital and into the realm of human identity in ancient religious law, that desire for a clean binary X-ray just completely falls apart. You're suddenly navigating this landscape that is, well, it's profoundly complex.
It really is. I mean, the moment you try to apply a rigid black and white diagnostic lens to something as dynamic as, say, centuries of tradition colliding with modern human experience, the tools just fail. You have to adopt a completely different framework.
Which is exactly the core mission of our deep dive today. We are taking you into a really fascinating stack of sources to explore how homosexuality is navigated within the Jewish tradition and also the modern state of Israel.
Yeah, we're unpacking a lot today.
We really are. We've got a historical overview of homosexuality in the Hebrew Bible,
Yeah.
a pivotal 2006 legal ruling from the Rabbinical Assembly, an amazing article from the organization Eshel about the struggles of Orthodox parents, and a timeline of LGBTQ rights in Israel. So we're looking at how an ancient religion and a modern nation grapple with tradition, human dignity, and, lived experience.
And it's such a layered topic.
It is. And
Yeah.
before we really get into it, I need to state a mandatory impartiality disclaimer for you, the listener. We are navigating materials today that touch on deeply held religious beliefs and intense political realities from a very wide spectrum of viewpoints.
Right.
So our role today is simply to map the territory for you. We are not here to endorse a theological stance, take a political side, or, validate one interpretation over another. We are purely tracing the fascinating ideas contained in these sources to help you understand this ecosystem.
And honestly, the evolution of these texts is wild. I mean, the way ancient religious laws are being reinterpreted today involves a deeply surprising cast of characters.
Oh, for sure.
We're talking about the political maneuvers of a 6th century Roman emperor, a forged medieval document, and a highly flexible legal loophole built directly into the Talmud centuries ago.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand the modern debate, we really have to start at the very foundation, right? We have to separate what the explicit biblical text actually says from the centuries of, political and cultural interpretation stacked on top of it.
Exactly. The text and the interpretation are two very different things.
Right. So in our sources, the texts most frequently cited are in Leviticus chapters 18 and 20, the Holiness Code. And historically, the explicit biblical ban here is specifically focused on male anal sex. It translates roughly to, do not lie with a man as one lies with a woman.
Right, which carried severe penalties historically.
But a detail that stands out immediately is the profound silence regarding women. Female homosexual relations aren't explicitly mentioned in the Hebrew Bible at all.
Which is fascinating because that absence of a prohibition is just as foundational as a written law. I mean, because lesbianism wasn't explicitly addressed, later rabbinic scholars had to figure out how to categorize it within a system entirely structured around, patriarchal definitions of sex and property.
So what do they do with it?
They ultimately defined it not as a capital offense, but as a lesser rabbinic prohibition. They kind of threw it under the umbrella of licentiousness, or compared it to the, quote, practices of Egypt.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it created a fundamentally different legal and social framework for women than for men, just because the original text was silent.
That silence definitely leaves room for interpretation. Which brings us to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 19. I mean, if you ask someone today what the sin of Sodom was, they'll instinctively say homosexuality. The very word sodomy derives from it.
Right, that's the common assumption.
But the sources reveal that the traditional Jewish view historically saw the city's sin as a catastrophic failure of hospitality. Philosophers like Philo and historians like Josephus, they focused on a mob attempting to violently interrogate and abuse Lot's visitors. It was about cruelty, not a blanket condemnation of a sexual orientation.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is how that historical interpretation morphs. The transformation from a story about violent inhospitality to the modern concept of sodomy is basically a masterclass in political maneuvering.
Wait, really? How so?
Well, in the 6th century, the Byzantine emperor Justinian the Great was facing a series of devastating earthquakes and plagues, and he needed a theological scapegoat.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so Justinian became the first to legally declare that the sin of Sodom was specifically same-sex activity. activities. He instituted legal novels mandating this interpretation, explicitly linking those acts to the natural disasters destroying his empire. He weaponized the biblical narrative.
Just to keep his state together.
Yes.
And his interpretation might have just stayed a Byzantine footnote if it weren't for a monk a few hundred years later.
Oh, Benedictus Levita.
Yes. Around 850 CE, this Frankish monk, using the pseudonym Benedictus Levita, Benedict the Levite, fabricated an entire series of fake legal documents, the Charlemagnean Capitularies.
Right, completely forged.
He lifted Justinian's interpretation and used it to demand burning at the stake for carnal sins. But his actual goal was to justify the Church's supremacy over secular institutions. It's crazy to realize how much of what we assume is an ancient biblical stance is actually just a medieval political strategy.
Exactly. And at the same time, the Hebrew Bible contains narratives that complicate the picture even further. You have these incredible depictions of same-sex devotion.
Like David and Jonathan.
Yes, in the books of Samuel. Their relationship is described with this intense emotional language. The text notes their love surpassed the love of women, and there's a scene where Jonathan literally strips off his armor to give it to David. Traditional scholars call it a platonic bond or a symbolic transfer of power, but modern scholars point out the textual ambiguity certainly allows for readings of romantic devotion.
And we see a similar devotion with women in the book of Ruth. Ruth makes that famous pledge to Naomi, "Whither thou goest, I will go." And ironically, that specific expression of loyalty is so powerful it's routinely used today in modern heterosexual Jewish wedding ceremonies.
Which is brilliant, right? The ancient textual landscape is clearly not a monolith. You've got explicit prohibitions, absolute silences, and these narratives of fierce devotion.
Right. So how does a modern religious movement handle these ancient, rigid laws when faced with modern scientific reality? They don't throw away the law.
No, they can't. Traditional legal systems survive by diving deeper into their own frameworks.
Which brings us to the 2006 Rabbinical Assembly responsum. This was a pivotal legal ruling in the conservative movement, and it only passed by a tight 13-12 vote.
Razor-thin margin. And to understand this ruling, you have to remember that Jewish law, or halakha, is a comprehensive, evolving legal system. The authors of this ruling, Rabbis Dorff, Nevins, and Reisner, they started by confronting modern science.
Right, they looked at the psychological consensus that sexual orientation is fundamentally unchangeable. It's not an illness.
And they paid very specific attention to the data on conversion therapies. The scientific consensus is that trying to force a change in sexual orientation is profoundly harmful. It leads to elevated suicide rates.
It's essentially torture.
Exactly. And from a halakhic standpoint, a legal requirement must be feasible for the community to bear. Expecting individuals to commit to a lifetime of total isolation is an invitation to profound suffering. So it ceases to be a viable legal expectation.
So what does this all mean? It's almost like discovering a constitutional loophole. Because they couldn't erase the core text of Leviticus, but Jewish law has this concept of building a fence around the Torah, right?
Yes. Secondary rules to stop you from accidentally breaking the main rule. So prohibitions against holding hands, hugging, living together.
Right. And the brilliance of the 2006 responsum is how they addressed those fences. They use a different, equally powerful legal principle from the Talmud called Kavod HaBriyot, which means human dignity. The Talmud actually states that human dignity is so great, it supersedes a negative commandment of the Torah.
It's an incredible application of jurisprudence. The authors argued that being permanently excluded from finding a life partner is an intolerable humiliation. Now, Kavod HaBriyot can't overturn a core, explicit biblical prohibition.
So the Leviticus ban remained.
Right. But they successfully argued that human dignity does allow them to completely dismantle all the rabbinic fences. So by knocking down the secondary prohibitions, they effectively normalized gay and lesbian Jews in the community, even allowing for their ordination as rabbis.
But wait, I read that some scholars, like Rabbi Joel Roth, push back hard on this. He argued that dignity only applies to protecting other people's feelings, not your own.
He did. His stance was basically that using your own dignity as an excuse places human dignity above God's dignity.
Right, so how did they answer that pushback?
Well, the authors rejected Roth's view by citing historical Talmudic precedents where dignity absolutely justified altering behavior for oneself. Like, there's an ancient law permitting a person to carry smooth stones on the Sabbath for personal hygiene.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, violating the restriction against carrying objects. They also highlighted a modern ruling allowing a hearing-impaired person to carry a hearing aid on the Sabbath. Dignity, they argued, is fundamentally a social phenomenon. A person barred from companionship is isolated. The legal system had to address it.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting to me. Because these theological debates don't just happen in high councils. They crash directly into the living rooms of conservative communities. And based on the Eshel article, the unexpected frontline warriors in this shift aren't the youth.
No, it's their parents.
Right. The Orthodox parents, when a child comes out, the parents are forced to, come out as well. And we usually expect the younger generation to rebel and leave for a liberal city. But these parents are in their 40s or 50s. They have jobs, homes, deep community ties. They can't just walk away.
Exactly. And the social mechanics make the stakes so incredibly high. In many Orthodox circles, marriages are arranged through strict matchmaking networks, shidduchim.
Right.
So if a family reveals they have a gay or transgender child, it can instantly threaten the marriageability of their other heterosexual children. The whole family's reputation is on the line.
And when they go to their rabbis for guidance, the sources show these rabbis are often completely unequipped. They're the first responders, but they'll tell parents to keep the child away from the synagogue to avoid a, quote, hostile environment. Or, worse, parents will be sitting in the pews listening to a rabbi blame Hurricane Katrina on gay people.
It's devastating.
Yeah.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is why the parents matter so much. Because they become the ultimate catalyst for systemic change.
They refuse to be closeted.
Exactly. By refusing to hide, they force their peers and their rabbis to confront the issue head-on. Organizations like Eshel and Tamika provide crucial peer support so they don't have to do it alone. They are effectively putting the Kavod HaBriyot human dignity theory into actual practice in the pews.
They're educating the religious establishment from the bottom up.
Precisely.
So from the deeply personal struggle of families, let's zoom out to the macro level. Because the timeline of LGBTQ rights in the State of Israel shows a modern nation navigating this exact same tension. And if you're listening to this and thinking Israel is just one big pride parade in Tel Aviv, think again.
Right, it's far more fractured than that.
Right.
Israel operates under a unique dual system. You have a secular parliament and Supreme Court passing progressive civil laws, but state-sanctioned religious authorities, the rabbinate, control personal status issues like marriage.
It's a crazy duality. But the rapid legal evolution on the secular side is stunning. In 1963, sodomy laws were practically nullified for private adults and fully abolished in 1988. Then, in 1993, the Israeli army allowed openly LGBTQ soldiers to serve in any capacity.
Which was decades ahead of many Western nations.
Completely. And the high-profile visibility is amazing.
Yeah.
You have Nitzan Horowitz, the first openly gay party leader and health minister, who actually banned conversion therapy in 2022. Amir Ohana, the first openly gay parliament member from the conservative Likud party.
And culturally, you have Dana International, a trans woman who won the Eurovision contest in 1998 representing Israel, and Yiska Smith, a trans Orthodox woman advocating within the Shabbat movement, which is deeply traditional.
But, and this is crucial, the sources document a really dark side to this progress. In 2009, there were tragic murders at the Tel Aviv Aguda branch, and in 2015, a 16-year-old girl was murdered at the Jerusalem Pride Parade by a religious extremist. How does a country balance a thriving LGBTQ culture with such intense religious extremism?
Well, this raises an important question about a state that is both democratic and Jewish. The tragedy of these hate crimes highlights that the theological tension we discussed earlier isn't just theoretical, right? It has literal life or death consequences.
Yeah.
The activism of groups like the Aguda fighting for rights in the secular courts represents this ongoing daily struggle to carve out safety within a fractured system.
It's just an incredible landscape. I mean, the journey of this deep dive has taken us from the ancient interpretations of Genesis being shaped by medieval politics to modern rabbis using human dignity as a legal loophole.
And to the quiet courage of Orthodox parents in their living rooms, all the way to the vibrant, complex society of modern Israel.
Exactly. And for you listening, this isn't just about a single social issue. It's really a masterclass in how ancient traditions and laws bend, adapt, and negotiate with the reality of modern human existence and science.
It absolutely is. And I want to leave you with one final thing to ponder that wasn't directly stated in the text.
Oh, what's that?
Well, we spent a lot of time talking about how Jewish law had to adapt to accommodate human dignity, right? But what if the reverse is true?
What do you mean?
What if the only reason ancient traditions survive for thousands of years is because they contain internal mechanisms like Kavod HaBriyot that allow them to evolve? People often frame adaptation as a betrayal of the past. But perhaps adaptation is the ultimate proof of a tradition's resilience. It's the very thing that ensures it survives into the next century.
Wow. Yeah, that maybe without that flexibility, it would just snap under the pressure of modern life. That's a profound way to look at it. We will leave you to explore that idea on your own. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.